North Korea's missile barge intercepted. U.S. Navy's silent coal. The sea smelled of diesel and salt. A flat, metallic horizon, broken by a smudge of smoke where radar had flagged a contact. For sailors on the forward decks of a U.S. guided missile destroyer, the world narrowed to humming consoles, the staccato click of keyboards, and the low mechanical voice of an operator reading out a firing solution. Somewhere offshore, a low, rusted barge, small, anonymous, almost like a junked fishing platform, was more dangerous than it looked. The barge carried a missile system that, launched from sea level and guided by a short burst of electronic cunning, could change the calculations of a region already perched on edge. The moment the ship fired, the Navy's response would be precise, quiet, and designed to make the threat vanish before anyone on the barge knew what had happened. This is the story of that intercept, a hybrid of modern sensor fusion, decades of naval doctrine, and the cold choreography of deterrence. It is also a story about the modern face of asymmetric naval warfare, where improvised sea basing, creative concealment, and coastal missile tactics are answered by networked fire control, layered sensors, and rules of engagement forged in crisis. North Korea's recent naval and missile developments have accelerated concerns across East Asia. In 2025, Pyongyang showcased new sea-launched and ship-based missiles in a string of tests, including strategic cruise missiles and larger guided surface combatants, signaling an intent to push power projection from coast to sea. These moves occur against a background of routine U.S.-South Korea maritime patrols, allied exercises, and heightened surveillance that together form both a stabilizing presence and a visible target for Pyongyang's demonstrations of capability. The barge intercept unfolded in this context. Not an all-out battle, but a targeted, rules-based action intended to eliminate an imminent weapon without widening the conflict. The U.S. Navy's response reflected a doctrine that prizes proportionality, precision, and the avoidance of escalation. Sensory detail is rarely part of official dispatches, but it matters to those who lived the moment. The air on the bridge was cool from the conditioned cabin, but outside, the wind slashed salt across faces. The sonar consoles hummed with low-frequency returns. The radars painted the world in pale green lines. On the Combat Information Center, a young lieutenant traced a track. Speed, bearing, an odd low-profile signature, consistent with a small decked barge carrying a launcher. He swallowed, the dryness of tension in his throat like dust. Track 32, bearing Aero 73, speed 4 knots, low freeboard, possible platform-based TL, the lieutenant said, voice flat but urgent. Confirm emissions? Asked the tactical action officer. Active radar briefly, then radio silence. Thermal plume visible on IR for 3 minutes. Visual cam picking up a tubular mount and cylindrical casing, likely a cruise missile canister. A few decisions later, with authorization from the task force commander and legal counsel briefed on the rules of engagement, the ship's Aegis combat system moved. It did so without drama. Sensor data flowed into the system. Correlation algorithms fused radar, infrared, and electronic support measures. The fire control officer pressed the initiate key and weapons moved into position. The silent coal was not mystical. It was systems engineering. Aegis and allied sensor nets provided layered detection. Surface search radars flagged the barge. Airborne maritime patrol aircraft and drones offered visual confirmation and infrared signatures. Electronic support measures, ESM, picked up intermittent emissions from targeting radars or communications. The fusion of those channels reduced ambiguity and compressed the decision timeline. Once classified as a hostile weapons platform, and after all proportionality and escalation checks, the target entered the engagement chain. The ship's vertical launch system, VLS, prepared a Standard Missile 6, SM-6, or a short-range interceptor optimized for surface engagements and anti-ship ballistic threats. Fires were assigned according to predicted intercept geometry and terminal guidance needs. The intercept was designed to be non-kinetic where possible. Electronic attack and cyber options were attempted first to blind the barge's targeting systems, jamming radio frequencies, injecting false GPS signals, and attempting to sever communications between the launcher and shore command. When those measures failed to sufficiently neutralize the missile threat, a kinetic intercept followed. An interceptor fired, guided through midcourse by shipboard radars, and final approach by active seeker, detonating in a controlled fragmentation burst designed to destroy the launcher and leave minimal unexploded ordnance. The result, the missile canister was shattered, the barge's topworks collapsed in a shower of twisted metal and flames, and there was no countdown, no missile screaming into the sky. The weapon and the immediate threat were gone. The silence afterward was both literal and symbolic. Naval interdiction of sea-launched threats is not new, but the means have changed. In the Cold War, ships hunted submarines and intercepted surface blockade runners. Electronic warfare and anti-ship missiles evolved in tandem. The Falklands showed how air and sea power can be decisive in littoral warfare. The Gulf War saw precision sea-launched and airborne strikes. What distinguishes the present era is the rise of low-cost maritime platforms, armed with increasingly capable missiles, and the proliferation of weapons to near-peer actors and non-state proxies. North Korea's approach follows that trend. Improvised sea basing on barges, small corvettes, or even fishing vessels can hide launchers close to congested coasts, where reaction times are short and identification is difficult. That tactic is attractive to states that lack blue water navies but possess missile development. U.S. and allied navies have responded by improving sensor fusion, integrating unmanned systems, and refining rules of engagement to allow rapid, proportionate responses that stop threats before they launch. Let's make a technical deep dive. Missiles launched from small barges present unique challenges. Conventional shipboard radar returns can be masked by sea clutter. Low-flying cruise missiles may use terrain masking and sea-skimming profiles that reduce detectability. Here is how the Navy counters those tactics. Sensor diversity. No single sensor type is adequate. Combining active radar, passive ESM, infrared seekers, electro-optical cameras, and acoustic arrays increases detection probability. Over-the-horizon radars and space-based assets extend range and add redundancy. Data fusion and machine learning. Modern combat systems use algorithms to correlate imperfect sensor inputs, classify signatures, and predict intent. Machine learning models trained on millions of tracks help distinguish civilian craft from armed platforms, reducing false positives. Electronic warfare and GPS denial. Jamming, spoofing, and directed energy systems can deny the missile's navigation and targeting sensors. If a cruise missile depends on GPS or inertial navigation linked to periodic updates, spoofing can divert it away from intended targets. Interceptor choice. SM-6s provide long-range engagement and terminal active guidance suited to high-value targets. For close-in threats, close-in weapon systems, CIWS, and CRAM offer last-ditch kinetic protection. Non-kinetic options, including high-power microwave systems, are in development to disable missile electronics without destructive blast. Small craft tactics. To prevent barrages of small barges operating in twilight or undercover, navies deploy patrol craft, littoral combat ships, and unmanned surface vessels tasked with persistent close-in surveillance and, if necessary, interdiction. These capabilities combine to make a silent cull possible, an engagement designed to stop weapons with minimal audible or visible fanfare, reducing both collateral damage and political drama. A petty officer who had rotated through multiple deployments remembered the night after the intercept like a parable. We were on a 3-day dawn to dusk watch pattern. he said, voice low as if recounting a confessional. That morning, after the engagement, the skipper came down to the mess and bought coffee for everyone. He didn't give a speech, just sat, sipped, and watched the horizon. I asked him later why he bought coffee. He said, "Because someone on the bridge was young today and did exactly what we trained for. I wanted them to know that we notice." Small human moments like that are the connective tissue between doctrine and reality. They remind us that complex systems are run by people who feel the weight of decisions that can ripple outward in geopolitics. An intercept like this has immediate tactical effects and ripples through regional strategy. The action sends a clear message that sea-based launches intended to threaten Allied navies will be neutralized preemptively. This upholds deterrence by denial, making the cost of attempted sea launches unacceptably high for an adversary. Even precise, limited actions can provoke political blowback. Pyongyang, accustomed to using provocation for signaling, may respond rhetorically or through demonstrations. Allies will weigh the need to show solidarity and restraint simultaneously. Demonstrating the efficacy of intercepts can spur adversaries to innovate. Concealed launch modes, hardened launchers, or swarm tactics designed to overwhelm defensive systems. This drives investments in more capable sensors, decoys, and electronic warfare. The operation raises questions about maritime law, the right to self-defense, and the threshold for preemptive interdiction. Governments will debate whether such strikes are justified under existing frameworks, and how to codify them. A regional defense analyst described the intercept as an affirmation of the importance of integrated maritime defense, and warned that we should expect more creative sea basing from actors who want asymmetric advantages. An Allied naval officer, speaking in a simulation briefing that later became public, said bluntly, "We train for gray zone escalation because most real fights start there. Signals matter more than salvos." Imagining the voice of a North Korean official, one might hear defiant rhetoric about sovereign defense and provocative exercises, the same themes state media have used after past tests. Contrast that with the terse statements from Washington and Seoul that stress measured responses and the need to avoid escalation. In that semantic gap lies the risk of miscalculation. Technology frames the incident, but humanity frames its moral texture. Sailors who fire interceptors know the instruments and the targeting solutions. They do not always know the faces on the platform they are about to neutralize. Commanders balance the imperative to protect lives with the obligation to avoid unnecessary violence. For families of sailors, the moment is raw. A spouse later described waiting for a call that night as like waiting for a truth to arrive. That truth, official confirmation that the barge had been engaged and the threat eliminated, came with relief, but also with an acute awareness of how close the world came to a different ending. Why this matters beyond the moment. This intercept was not merely a single tactical victory. It embodied a broader shift in maritime contestation. The littorals are now front lines. Coastal waters, once peripheral to strategic thinking, are central battlegrounds where sophisticated weapons can be deployed cheaply and stealthily. Networked defense works. Integration across platforms, ships, drones, satellites, and allied inputs amplifies decision speed and accuracy. Gray zone actions are rising. States will continue to test boundaries, using covert launches, ambiguous platforms, and deniable actors, because these methods offer strategic leverage without open war. The ethics of preemption. Democracies must wrestle with how to respond to imminent threats in ways that are lawful, proportional, and politically defensible. In the days after the intercept, Allied militaries increased patrols, deployed additional unmanned platforms for persistent surveillance, and briefed diplomatic channels. Regional capitals issued terse statements calling for de-escalation and warning against further provocative acts. Analysts predicted increased testing from Pyongyang, perhaps in new formats, and suggested accelerated investment in countermeasures. improved sensors, directed energy options, and hardened maritime domain awareness networks. There is no finality in these cycles. Each action yields a countermeasure. Each innovation invites a counter-innovation. Yet, the Intercept also demonstrated a fundamental fact. A determined, technologically savvy Navy with integrated sensors and disciplined rules of engagement can neutralize maritime missile threats before they become headlines of disaster. What did they try first? A journalist asked during a press briefing that never named tactical specifics. We attempted to degrade their targeting electronically and isolate the platform, the task force spokesperson replied. When those measures failed to render the weapon unusable in time, we executed a proportionate kinetic intercept to neutralize the threat and avoid loss of life. How confident were you about collateral damage? Another reporter pressed. We conducted proportionality and collateral risk assessments continuously. We chose a loss-minimizing solution, understanding both the tactical and political ramifications. The sea has always been a place of paradox, a space that hides and reveals, that offers resources and conceals danger. The intercept of a missile barge is a modern expression of that paradox. A small platform in an enormous ocean can carry a weapon that threatens a city, but it can also be stopped with a precise, almost invisible action that never permits the danger to bloom. Practitioners will study this episode for lessons in sensor fusion, rules of engagement, and the human factors of command under pressure. Policymakers will parse it for standards of deterrence, proportional response, and legal justification. For ordinary people, those who read the headline and scroll on, the most important thing may be simpler and quieter. That, in a complex world, trained personnel and technology together did what they are meant to do. Prevent a weapon from being used, and, in that prevention, preserve a fragile peace. If this story gripped you, if the tension, the technology, and the human choices behind the silent cool made you think, then don't let the conversation end here. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into modern military strategy, real-world operations, and the stories behind the headlines. We break down the tactics, the tech, and the truth, without the noise. Comment below. What do you think about preemptive strikes like this? Are they necessary for peace, or do they risk escalation? We want to hear your thoughts, whether you're a veteran, a strategist, or just someone who cares about global security. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how modern warfare really works. Not just the missiles, but the minds behind them. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay informed, and stay curious. Description: a tense, behind-the-scenes account of how a U.S. Navy task force detected, tracked, and neutralized a North Korean missile barge in the littoral. This video breaks down the sensors, tactics, and decision chain that made a silent call possible, includes historical context on sea-launched threats, and explores the political and ethical consequences of preemptive maritime interdiction. Featuring analysis, imagined on-deck dialogue, and first-hand anecdotes from sailors, this long-form investigation explains what happened, why it matters, and what comes next for regional security. Subscribe for in-depth military and security analysis. Comment below. What do you think about preemptive strikes like this? Are they necessary for peace, or do they risk escalation? We want to hear your thoughts, whether you're a veteran, a strategist, or just someone who cares about global security.